What happens when a beloved television presenter walks onto a morning talk show expecting a friendly chat, only to be ambushed, humiliated, and ultimately thrown off, set in front of millions of viewers? In just 41 seconds, one comment from Lorraine Kelly would turn a routine interview into the most shocking moment in daytime television history. Nick Knowles arrived at the studio that morning with a smile on his face. He had been invited to discuss his latest charity work, helping to rebuild homes for families in need. It was supposed to be a feel-good segment, the kind of heartwarming content that morning viewers love with their tea and toast. But from the moment he sat down on that sofa, something felt different. The atmosphere was cold, tense. Lorraine Kelly, usually all warmth and charm for the cameras, had a look in her eyes that said this interview was going to go somewhere else entirely. Sitting beside Lorraine on the panel were two of her regular contributors, Christine Lampard and Ranveer Singh. Both women smiled politely as Nick settled into his seat, but there was an edge to the air that he could not quite place. "Nick, lovely to have you here," Lorraine began, her voice dripping with a sweetness that felt almost sarcastic. "I see you have been doing your little building projects again." Nick laughed, assuming it was a playful jab. "Well, yes. We have just finished a home for a family who lost everything in a fire. It was an incredible experience. Really humbling." Lorraine nodded slowly, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Humbling. Right. Must be nice to play the hero every now and then." The comment landed like a slap. Christine shifted uncomfortably in her seat, glancing at Ranveer with wide eyes. Nick's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "I would not say hero," he replied carefully. "Just trying to help where I can." "Of course," Lorraine said, leaning back in her chair with an air of superiority. "Though I have to wonder, Nick, is it really about helping people, or is it more about keeping yourself relevant? I mean, when was the last time you did anything significant on television that was not just, hammering nails and looking rugged for the cameras?" The studio went silent. Even the crew members behind the cameras exchanged shocked glances. This was not the Lorraine Kelly that audiences knew. This was something else entirely. Nick took a deep breath, his jaw tightening. "Lorraine, I am not sure what you are getting at, but these projects mean a lot to the families we help. It is not about me." "Oh, but it is though, is it not?" Lorraine pressed, her voice growing sharper. "Every time you do one of these builds, there are cameras everywhere. Your face all over the news. Saint Nick, coming to save the day. It must be exhausting. All that self-promotion disguised as charity." Christine finally spoke up, her voice gentle but firm. "Lorraine, I think that might be a bit unfair. Nick has been doing this work for years." Lorraine turned to Christine with a withering look. "I am sorry, Christine. I did not realize you were here to defend him. I thought this was my show." Christine fell silent, her cheeks flushing red. Ranveer stared down at her notes, he clearly wanting no part of whatever was unfolding. Nick leaned forward, his patience visibly wearing thin. "Look, if you have a problem with me, that is fine. But do not dismiss the work that dozens of volunteers put in to help people who are struggling. That is not fair to them." "Fair?" Lorraine scoffed, actually scoffed on live television. "You want to talk about fair? Let me tell you what is not fair, Nick. What is not fair is coming on my show, using my platform to boost your own image, and then acting like you are some kind of saint. You are not a charity worker. You are a television presenter who found a clever angle." The words hung in the air like poison. The camera operators did not know where to point their lenses. The producers in the control room were frozen, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let this car crash continue. Nick's hands gripped the edge of the sofa. "A clever angle? These are real families, Lorraine. Real people with real problems." "Oh, please," Lorraine interrupted, her voice dripping with condescension. "Do not lecture me about real people. I have been in this industry for decades. I know exactly how this works. You find a sob story. You bring in the cameras. You put on your tool belt and your concerned face, and boom, instant good publicity. That is not what this is, Nick said through gritted teeth. Then what is it? Lorraine challenged, leaning forward aggressively. Explain to me, Nick. Explain why every single project you do just happens to have a full film crew documenting your every move. Explain why every family you help just happens to give tearful interviews about how amazing you are. Explain why your face is plastered all over the news every time you pick up a hammer. Ranveer tried again, her voice stronger this time. Lorraine, this is really inappropriate. Inappropriate? Lorraine turned on her with eyes blazing. What is inappropriate is sitting here pretending that we all do not see exactly what is happening. This is my show, and if I want to ask real questions instead of throwing softball compliments, then that is what I am going to do. There is a difference between asking questions and launching attacks, Christine said quietly but firmly. Lorraine laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course you would defend him. Everyone always defends him. Saint Nick can do no wrong. Nobody is saying that, Nick interjected, but you are not even giving me a chance to respond. You are just throwing accusations. Fine, Lorraine said, crossing her arms. Respond then. Tell me I am wrong. Tell me that you would still be doing these builds if there were no cameras, no publicity, no career benefits. Nick took a breath, clearly trying to maintain his composure. Yes, I would. Because before any of this was televised, I was volunteering on building projects. Before I was on television at all, I was helping with community builds. This is not something I started for the cameras. The cameras came later. How convenient that you say that now, Lorraine shot back. How convenient that you have this whole backstory ready to go. It is not a backstory. It is the truth, Nick said, his frustration growing more evident. And the fact that you refuse to believe it says more about you than it does about me. Nick's face had gone from friendly to stone cold. That is completely out of line. Is it? Lorraine shot back. Because from where I am sitting, it looks like you have built an entire career out of playing dress-up as a builder. You swoop in with your cameras, build a wall or two, shed a tear for the papers, and then you are off to the next project. Meanwhile, the real charity workers, the ones who do this every single day without any recognition, they get nothing. Those real charity workers you're talking about? Nick said, his voice sharp now. Half of them are on my projects, working alongside me. And they would be appalled to hear you using them as a weapon in whatever personal vendetta you have got going on here. Lorraine's eyes narrowed. Personal vendetta? You think this is personal? I do not know what else to call it, Nick replied. You invited me here to talk about charity work, and you have spent the entire time attacking my character. If that is not personal, then what is it? It is called holding people accountable, Lorraine said coldly. Accountable for what? Nick demanded. For trying to help people? For using whatever platform I have to make a difference? Those are the crimes you are accusing me of? The crime, Lorraine said, her voice rising, is pretending to be something you are not. And what am I pretending to be? Nick asked. A good person, Lorraine said. R and the studio went completely silent. A good person, Lorraine said, and the studio went completely silent. Christine gasped audibly. Ranveer put her hand over her mouth. Even the audience members who had been shifting uncomfortably in their seats were now completely still. Nick stared at Lorraine for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but cutting. You do not know me. You do not know anything about me. I know enough, Lorraine said. I know that you have made a fortune off the backs of people's suffering. I know that you have turned tragedy into entertainment. I know that you smile for the cameras while families are at their lowest point. Stop, Christine said, her voice breaking. Lorraine, please stop. But Lorraine was not stopping. Those families do not need you, Nick. They need real help. Or they need social services. They need government support. They need systemic change. What they do not need is a television presenter showing up to make himself feel important. I never claimed to be the solution to everything, Nick said, his voice shaking now, with barely controlled anger. I never said I was fixing broken systems. I am just trying to help where I can. One family at a time, one home at a time. And if that is not good enough for you, then I am sorry, but I will not apologize for it. One family at a time, Lorraine repeated mockingly. How noble, how utterly noble of you. Tell me, Nick, how many families have you helped this year? I do not keep count, Nick said. Of course you do not, Lorraine said with a harsh laugh. Because it is not about the numbers, right? It is about the feeling. And the warm, fuzzy feeling you get when people thank you and tell you how wonderful you are. Ranveer finally found her voice, quiet but audible. Lorraine, maybe we should talk about something else. No, Ranveer, Lorraine snapped. I am tired of pretending. I am tired of having guests on this show who think they can use us for their own agenda. Nick stood up. The movement was sudden enough that it made Christine jump slightly in her seat. I came here in good faith, he said, his voice low and controlled. I came here to talk about helping a family who had nothing, and you have turned this into a personal attack. I do not know what your problem is, but I will not sit here and be insulted. Oh, sit down, Nick, Lorraine said dismissively, waving her hand at him like he was a child having a tantrum. You are being dramatic. Dramatic? Nick's voice rose slightly. You have spent the last 5 minutes tearing into me and questioning my integrity. How exactly am I supposed to respond to that? Lorraine stood up as well, her eyes flashing. You know what? If you cannot handle a few honest questions, then maybe you should not be doing interviews. Maybe you should stick to your little building projects, where everyone tells you how wonderful you are. Honest questions? Nick repeated, his disbelief clear. There was nothing honest about that. You ambushed me. You invited me here under false pretenses, just so you could tear me down on television. Nobody forced you to come, Lorraine shot back. You wanted the airtime. You wanted the publicity. Well, here it is. How does it feel? Christine stood up, placing a hand on Lorraine's arm. Lorraine, please. This has gone too far. Lorraine shook her off. Stay out of this, Christine. Nick shook his head, his disappointment visible. I have done hundreds of interviews in my career. I've been asked tough questions. I've been challenged, and I have always respected that. But this is not journalism. This is not even professional. This is just cruel. Oh, spare me the moral high ground speech, Lorraine said, her voice dripping with contempt. You are not the victim here, Nick. You are just upset that someone finally called you out. Called me out for what exactly? Nick demanded. For helping people? For using whatever platform I have to make a difference? What exactly is the crime here, Lorraine? The crime, Lorraine said, stepping closer to him, is that you are a fake. You are a television personality, playing at being a humanitarian. And I am sick of people like you getting praised for doing the bare minimum while actual heroes go unnoticed. The studio was in complete chaos now. The producers were shouting into headsets, trying to figure out whether to cut the feed. The audience, a small group of about 30 people who had come for a pleasant morning show experience, sat in stunned silence. Ranveer stood up, her voice firmer this time. Lorraine, you need to stop. This is not okay. Oh, not you too, Lorraine said, turning on Ranveer. What is this? The Nick Knowles Defense League? This is not about defending anyone, Ranveer said. This is about you attacking a guest for no reason. Whatever you are upset about, this is not the way to handle it. Lorraine's face flushed red. How dare you tell me how to handle my own show? It might be your show, Nick interjected, but that does not give you the right to treat people like this. I thought you were better than this, Lorraine. I really did. But clearly, I was wrong. Get out! Lorraine said suddenly, her voice cutting through the noise like a knife. Everyone froze. What? Nick said. I said get out, Lorraine repeated, pointing toward the exit. "Get off my show. Get out of my studio. I do not want you here." Nick stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether she was serious. When her expression did not change, he let out a bitter laugh. "You know what? Fine. I will go. But let me tell you something first. The family I helped last week, they have a roof over their heads now. They have walls that will keep them warm this winter. They have a home. And no matter what you say about me, no matter how you try to twist it, that is real. That matters. And I will keep doing it, whether you approve or not." He turned to leave, but Lorraine was not done. "Of course you will," she called after him, "because you need it. You need those cameras. You need those stories. You need people to think you are a good person, because deep down, you know you are not." Nick stopped in his tracks. For a moment, it looked like he might turn around and say something back, but instead, he just shook his head and kept walking. Christine's voice was barely a whisper. "Lorraine, what have you done?" Lorraine sat back down, crossing her arms defiantly. "What I should have done a long time ago. I am sick of fake people getting away with fake charity." "That was not fake," Ranveer said, her voice shaking. "And you know it. Whatever your issue is with Nick, that was not fake." The producers finally cut to commercial, but the damage was done. Backstage, Nick was surrounded by crew members apologizing, telling him they had no idea that was going to happen. He waved them off politely, still in shock at what had just transpired. Back on set, Christine and Ranveer sat in silence, neither of them looking at Lorraine. The host stared straight ahead, her jaw set, refusing to acknowledge that anything was wrong. When the show came back from commercial, Lorraine's demeanor had completely changed. She was all smiles again, her voice bright and cheerful as she introduced the next segment about gardening tips for spring. It was as if the previous 10 minutes had never happened. But Christine and Ranveer knew better. The audience knew better. And somewhere, millions of viewers at home knew better too. The gardening expert, an elderly woman named Margaret, seemed blissfully unaware of the tension as she demonstrated how to prune roses. Lorraine nodded along, asking questions with that same practiced charm she was famous for. But her eyes were different now. There was something hard in them, something defensive. Christine excused herself during the next commercial break, mumbling something about needing air. She did not come back. Ranveer stayed, but she kept her contributions minimal, answering only when directly addressed. As the show continued, so Lorraine seemed determined to prove that everything was normal. She laughed louder than usual at jokes that were not particularly funny. She complimented guests with an enthusiasm that felt forced. She smiled so much that it started to look painful. But in the control room, the producers were in crisis mode. Phones were ringing off the hook. Social media was exploding. Clips of the confrontation were already being shared thousands of times. The network executives were demanding answers. How did this happen? Why did nobody stop it? What were they going to do about it? On set, Lorraine powered through, segment after segment. A cooking demonstration, a fashion feature, a discussion about upcoming films. She treated each one with the same manufactured enthusiasm, never once acknowledging the elephant in the room. Ranveer, to her credit, maintained her professionalism. She contributed when necessary, kept her tone neutral, and did not give Lorraine any ammunition for another outburst. But the warmth that usually characterized their on-screen dynamic was gone, replaced by a careful politeness that felt more appropriate for strangers than colleagues. During a segment about holiday destinations, Lorraine turned to Ranveer with a bright smile. "Have you got any trips planned, Ranveer?" Ranveer's response was measured. "Nothing confirmed yet, just looking at options." "Oh, come on, you must have somewhere in mind," Lorraine pressed, trying to generate the kind of casual banter that usually flowed easily between them. "Like I said," Ranveer replied evenly, "nothing confirmed. The exchange was brief, but the chill was unmistakable. Lorraine's smile tightened just slightly before she turned back to the travel expert they were interviewing. As the show moved into its final segments, the energy in the studio remained strained. The audience, who typically provided enthusiastic applause and reactions, were subdued. Even they could sense that something fundamental had shifted. Lorraine introduced a segment about a local choir, and as the singers performed, there was a moment where the camera caught her face in profile. For just a second, the mask slipped. There was something in her expression that might have been regret, or perhaps defensiveness, or maybe just exhaustion. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced once again by that determinedly cheerful smile. The choir finished their song to genuine applause. Music, at least, was neutral ground. Nobody could argue with the simple joy of a well-performed tune. Lorraine thanked them profusely, perhaps a bit too profusely, and sent them off with promises that they would be invited back soon. As the show approached its final minutes, Lorraine delivered her closing remarks with the same practiced ease she had used for years. She thanked the guests, thanked the audience, reminded everyone to tune in tomorrow, and signed off with her signature warmth. But Ranveer's goodbye was noticeably cooler. She smiled, she waved, but there was none of the usual affection in her voice when she echoed Lorraine's sentiments. The moment the camera stopped rolling, the studio atmosphere changed completely. Lorraine stood up immediately, removing her microphone without waiting for the sound technician. She walked off set without speaking to anyone, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Ranveer sat for a moment longer, accepting her microphone removal with a quiet thank you to the crew member. The audience was ushered out quickly, many of them whispering about what they had witnessed. In the green room, guests who had appeared earlier were hearing about what happened from crew members. The gardening expert, Margaret, looked particularly distressed. "I had no idea," she kept saying. "I was just talking about roses." Meanwhile, Nick had already left the building. He had declined offers from sympathetic producers to release a statement. He simply wanted to go home. Back in the studio, the crew began breaking down the set for the day. Usually a time of casual conversation, today people worked in near silence. One of the camera operators finally spoke up. "In 20 years, I have never seen anything like that." Others nodded in agreement. There had been awkward moments before, technical difficulties that created tension. But nothing like this. Nothing so deliberately confrontational, so personal. A producer emerged from the control room, looking pale. "Meeting in 10 minutes, she announced. "Conference room B." In her dressing room, Lorraine sat alone, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her makeup was still perfect, her hair still in place, but her eyes told a different story. There was a knock at her door. She did not answer. The knock came again. "Lorraine, we need to talk," came a voice. It was her executive producer, Martin. Still, she said nothing. "Lorraine, I am coming in," Martin said, and the door opened. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "What were you thinking?" he asked, not unkindly, but with genuine confusion. Lorraine's jaw tightened. He deserved it. Deserved what, exactly? To be humiliated on live television? To be accused of fake charity work with no evidence? "He is not what people think he is," Lorraine said, her voice low. "And you know this how?" Martin pressed. "Did you have information? Did you have proof? Or did you just decide you did not like him?" Lorraine stood up abruptly, starting to pace. "People like him make me sick. They use tragedy to make themselves look good. They get their headlines, and then they disappear." "Even if that were true," Martin said carefully, "and I am not saying it is, that is not how you handle it. You do not ambush a guest. That is not journalism. That is just cruelty." "I am tired of pretending," Lorraine said, her voice rising. "Then maybe," Martin said quietly, "you should not be hosting a morning talk show." The words hung between them. Lorraine stopped pacing and turned to face him, her eyes flashing. "Are you threatening me?" "I am telling you the truth," Martin replied. "Morning television is built on trust. What you did today broke that trust, and I do not know if we can fix it." Lorraine sank back into her chair. "It just came out," she said, her voice smaller now. "I did not plan it." "Why though?" Martin asked. "What is really going on here?" But Lorraine did not answer. She just stared at the floor. Martin waited, then stood up. "The network is going to want answers. I would suggest you figure out what you are going to say." He left, now closing the door softly behind him. Down the hall, Christine and Ranveer sat together in silence before Christine finally spoke. "I have never seen her like that," she said. "Neither have I," Ranveer agreed. "That was not the Lorraine we know." "Do you think something is going on with her?" Ranveer shrugged. "Maybe, but that does not excuse it. Nobody deserves that." Christine nodded. "I felt so helpless. I tried to say something, but she just shut me down." "We all froze," Ranveer said, because nobody could believe what they were seeing. In the conference room, the meeting was tense. Producers and executives sat around the table, all looking shell-shocked. "We need to issue a statement," one executive said. "What can we possibly say?" another countered. "No, sorry our host verbally abused a guest on live television." "We have to say something," the first executive insisted. "This is going to be the lead story on every news program tonight." Martin entered and took his seat. "Has anyone spoken to her?" "I tried," someone said. "She would not answer." "I got in," Martin said. "She is defensive, angry, and she genuinely believes she was in the right." The room erupted in murmurs of disbelief. "She thinks she was right," someone said incredulously. "That is where her head is at," Martin said, "which makes this even more complicated." "Can we force her to apologize?" an executive asked. "We can try," Martin replied. "But if she does not mean it, viewers will see right through it. People can spot a fake apology from a mile away." "So what do we do?" the executive pressed. "Just let her destroy the show's reputation? We have built this program for years. One bad interview should not be able to tear it all down." "It was not just a bad interview," another voice chimed in. "It was a character assassination, on live television, in front of millions of people. That is not something we can just brush under the carpet." "Nobody is suggesting we brush it under the carpet," Martin said firmly. "But we need to be smart. We need to understand what triggered this, and we need a plan that actually addresses the problem, rather than just putting a plaster on it." "What about Nick?" someone asked. "Has anyone reached out to him? Does he plan to sue?" "Go to the press?" "He left without making any statements," Martin said, "but that does not mean he will not. He has every right to be furious." The discussion continued, voices overlapping, tensions rising. Every suggestion met with counter-arguments, every solution creating new problems. As staff filed out, the weight settled over everyone. This was a defining moment. Night had fallen by the time the studio emptied. Security guards walked the halls, checking doors were locked. In the parking lot, crew members who had stayed late remained, still processing what they had witnessed. Inside the dark studio, the set sat empty. The sofa where Nick and Lorraine had sat was still arranged perfectly for tomorrow. Cameras powered down, lights off, everything appearing normal. But nothing was normal anymore. And everyone knew that when the lights came back on, the show would be facing its very biggest test yet.